to see so many of you here today in the audience for this very important event. It's a discussion that's not easy, but it's absolutely necessary. And so all the more thank you for showing up tonight. I want to thank in particular our partners from the Ukrainian Institute, London, for co-organizing this important event with us. And I'd also like to welcome our expert panel and our moderator, Nigel. As Deputy Ambassador of the European Union here in London, I often speak about Ukraine sort of in institutional terms, about the support we provide, our policies, coordination. But tonight's topic goes beyond that and goes deeper, and in many ways cuts to the core of the issues which we are facing. And it's also particularly close to my heart. Because accountability is not just about figures and diplomacy, it's about whether we stand by our principles, even when it's hard, uncomfortable, and politically costly. Nearly 4 years into Russia's full-scale invasion against Ukraine, the scale of documented crimes is simply staggering. More than 164,000 war crimes. Cases are pending, and these are not just numbers. These are people, men, women, children, whose lives have been shattered. And these crimes are not incidental. They reflect a very deliberate choice about how this war is being fought. From the very start, the EU has been clear that ensuring full accountability for us is not only a moral duty, but it's a strategic necessity. Impunity travels, and so it weakens laws, it emboldens perpetrators elsewhere, and it threatens global security. And so what's at stake in Ukraine is not only the country's future, but the credibility of international law, and ultimately the safety of all of us. Ukraine has shown extraordinary courage in pursuing justice, even while defending its very survival. But this cannot be Ukraine's burden alone. It's a shared responsibility, and we very much see it that way. Now, we as the EU support Ukraine in several practical ways. We are helping the Prosecutor General's Office to investigate and prosecute crimes through the EU Advisory Mission and the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group, together with our partners here in the UK and elsewhere. And of course, we also firmly back the International Criminal Court. And Ukraine's ratification of the Rome Statute in January 2025, amidst the war, shows the country's steadfast commitment to justice. But we also have to be honest to ourselves and confront the gaps. Because the absence of full jurisdiction over the crime of aggression is serious. And this is why the EU supports the Special Tribunal for the Crime of Aggression and the International Center for its Prosecution in The Hague. Because ultimately, aggression is the root from which so many crimes flow. And ignoring its risks leaves the gravest violations unpunished. Now, civil society in all of this is vital. Organizations like Truth Hounds and the Reckoning Project document crimes, they preserve evidence, and they ensure that victims' voices are heard. Justice is not only about law, it's about truth, dignity, and remembering the suffering. We must resist the temptation to treat accountability as a negotiable. Because peace built on impunity is unstable. Justice is not an obstacle to peace, it's its very foundation. And we have to remember that. Now, the UK in all of this has been invaluable partner for us, offering legal expertise, pursuing universal jurisdiction cases, enforcing sanctions, and cooperating very closely with the EU and our Ukrainian partners. At the time when international law is under pressure, EU-UK cooperation on Ukraine shows that our commitment to justice remains strong. And at the center of accountability are the victims. They are not asking for abstract promises. They want to be heard, believed, and see justice done. And our responsibility is to ensure that their suffering is neither forgotten nor normalized. The European Union will continue to stand with Ukraine, not only defending its sovereignty, but the principles on which our collective security is built. Thank you again so much to all of you for being here tonight. I wish you an interesting discussion, and I'd now like to invite Olga Sidorushkina to introduce the panel and the moderator. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isabel, and good evening, everyone. My name is Olga Sidorushkina, and I'm a program coordinator and curator at the Ukrainian Institute London. For those who might not know us yet, we are an independent charity that champions Ukrainian culture and shape the conversation about Ukraine in the UK. Usually we do it through the diverse public-facing event like this one, for example, or our educational courses or digital content, and you can find out more about us and our mission on our website or social media. Please check on us. As Isabel already told, this event is co-organized in partnership with the delegation of the European Union to the United Kingdom, and we're extremely grateful for their team, especially to Adolfo Garcia Gomez, Andras Kos, Ambassador Pedro Serrana, and of course Deputy Ambassador Isabel Pavelbaum. Thank you for hosting us here at the Europe House tonight. It's very important that this theme is actually here, and we can have the final discussion at the Europe House today, focusing on the role of international community in prosecuting Russia's war crime, and talking about how international solidarity and shared responsibility can help counter the impunity. So my pleasure is to introduce the moderator, Nigel Gould-Davies, Senior Fellow for Russia and Eurasia, International Institute for Strategic Studies. Nigel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga, and thank you very much, Deputy Ambassador. So we are less than 1 month away from the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So the 5th year of this terrible war will soon begin. It was not only an assault on Ukraine's and Europe's security, but on basic principles of justice, law, and morality. And as the Deputy Ambassador alluded to, the large-scale violation of human rights, committing of war crimes and other abuses, appears to be intrinsic to Russia's way of war. There's much to discuss this evening as we explore the full spectrum of this issue. What has been happening, how war and other crimes have been documented and investigated, what the prospects are for justice and accountability, and it's important to remember this too, what we and our governments can do to advance this cause. We have a stellar panel with us to explore and share their expertise on these issues. And I'd like to begin by asking Wendy Betts, who's the legal director of the Reckoning Project, to open with her remarks. She's also a consultant to the Oxford Institute of Justice and Technology. I think you were involved with the International Criminal Court as well.
I've worked for various organizations that have contributed information to the ICC. So I want to thank you, Nigel, and to the organizers for giving us this opportunity to speak. As Nigel mentioned, I am the legal director of the Reckoning Project. And this is an organization that was founded in 2022, immediately following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The objective was to equip Ukrainian researchers and journalists to be able to collect information on atrocity crimes in a manner that could later be used in courts of law. So this approach allows the Reckoning Project, or TRP for short, to use both the courts of law and the courts of public opinion to promote accountability. The reason why we have this focus and why we do this work is precisely because of the theme of today's discussion, the understanding of the danger of impunity for future security. And in fact, the Reckoning Project's tagline is, without global accountability, there is no international security. The reason TRP focuses on this is a result of the lessons that we've learned about impunity from past experience. You heard the Deputy Ambassador give some examples. Many scholars have discussed the dangers of impunity for atrocity crimes. This continues the cycles of violence, it enables future violations, it perpetuates false narratives, it undermines the rules-based order, and perhaps most importantly, it leaves survivors with no ability to have their stories told and no recourse for the violations that they have suffered. So while there's many examples, I'll focus on the one most salient today, which is Russia. Prior to the full-scale invasion, we've seen Russia act with impunity in Chechnya, in Georgia, in Syria, in Crimea and the Donbass, all paving the way for the full-scale invasion. And TRP actually issued a report showing similar tactics used across conflicts in Chechnya, in Syria, and now in Ukraine, meaning similar crimes have been committed across these conflicts. We've seen targeting of civilians in airstrikes. We've seen targeting of key civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, water supply, food supply, energy infrastructure. So impunity doesn't only embolden civilian leaders to think that they will not be stopped. It actually means the same military units, the same commanders, the same soldiers remain available to shift from one conflict to another, employing the same tactics and committing the same violations. So the antidote to impunity is accountability. And here I'm going to be speaking specifically about legal accountability, and focusing even more specific on individual criminal responsibility. Now, I'm not talking about state level accountability, but this is not to say this is not equally important avenue to be pursuing. But legal accountability of individuals strips those perpetrators of their power, their position, and their ability to continue to commit these crimes. So as we learn lessons about impunity, we've learned lessons about accountability, looking back at conflicts such as those in the Balkans, Sierra Leone, Rwanda, and many others. So there's 3 lessons I'd like to highlight tonight because I think they're particularly relevant to Ukraine. So I'll list them now, and then I'll say a few words about each. So first, it takes the entire international community to address crimes at this scale. Second, it takes a very long time to address crimes at this scale. And finally, legal accountability is an incomplete form of justice. So first, on the role of the international community. Because of the sheer volumes of crimes, and you've heard the numbers, it is not possible for crimes committed at this scale to be addressed in one forum. You cannot expect a domestic system to be able to cope with this caseload while still addressing their domestic law enforcement and judicial needs. The other reason why we need to look to the whole international community is because of the nature of the perpetrators. Imagine, if you will, perpetrators in the form of a pyramid. At the top, you have a very small group of intellectual architects that conceived and oversaw the totality of the violations. But these individuals are often the most protected by immunities and the means to insulate themselves from justice in domestic courts. At the middle level, you have civilian and military leaders that are carrying out these plans. They are no less culpable, but they are larger in number, and they are less protected from prosecution. And then finally, the base of the pyramid are the line level soldiers, or the cooperating civilians, who are the largest in number, but with responsibility for fewer crimes, and though all not less culpable, accountability for them affects fewer victims. So for these and many other reasons, we need to look at legal accountability as an ecosystem involving the domestic jurisdictions, in this case Ukraine, the International Criminal Court, and very importantly, as I believe Zira will discuss, third countries who are exercising universal jurisdiction. And there needs to be active collaboration between these three. By employing all of these options, you have the scope to address a larger number of perpetrators, which means a larger number of victims, and it dramatically narrows the world for perpetrators because they are no longer shielded from prosecution outside the borders of the country where they committed the crime. So second, on the time frame, sadly there is no shortage of new conflicts and crises to divert our attention, but combating impunity requires persistent commitment. These are very complex crimes to investigate and try. If you look, for example, to the ICTY in Yugoslavia, while they successfully tried all 161 of their indictees, it took 24 years. Atrocity crime trials alone can take years, but once you add in the investigative phase, the pretrial proceedings, the appeals process, you're looking at potentially 10 or more years for one case. Now, Ukraine is unique in that accountability efforts are happening simultaneously with the conflict. So we are seeing accountability in real time in a way that we have never seen before. And the commitment we have seen, as you've heard from Europe and others, to the Office of the Prosecutor is very noteworthy and also arguably unprecedented. But this support will need to continue long after our attention is pulled elsewhere. Now, the third lesson, legal accountability is an incomplete form of justice. This may sound counterintuitive, but people often put too much pressure on what legal accountability can do. Legal accountability is often equated with justice, but justice can mean different things to different people, including both legal and non-legal remedies. The scale of violations and the number of perpetrators forces legal accountability to be pragmatic and practical. It will not address what happened to every victim. It will not address every type of violation that was committed. And this is because it will pursue what can be most easily proven in the most efficient time frame. So this is not to diminish the importance of accountability. I stand by everything I just said previously, but it is to say that accountability must be just one part of what will be required for survivors to achieve justice in a form that resonates and is meaningful to them. So I'll leave it there because I know Zara's going to put a lot more detail on that framework I laid out.
Thank you for kicking us off with some very clear and precise remarks. We'll be sharing views for about 45 minutes, and then there'll be half an hour for Q&A. So do think of your questions and comments as the conversation proceeds. And then there's what's called the informal part, which I think means drinks, discussion. We all have to get out of this building no later than 8:30. So you've already raised some very important issues. Just wanted to sort of touch on a couple of them there. You've set out very clearly, and others will have views as well, and they'll amplify this, that questions of justice and accountability are not just a sort of a nice to have, not just sort of some optional extra that we'll try to achieve if we can, but are intrinsic to achieving security in the future as well. As if you've established that connection tightly and sort of exploring and interrogating that, I think will be very useful work for us. People sometimes think, oh, international law, well, you know, it's very fragile, but it's intrinsic to the prospects for security. That's really fundamental. It also has implications for the eventual peace that emerges. And I think we've probably all been quite concerned and disquieted by the fact that some versions of peace plans that have emerged imply, more than imply, a kind of a drawing a line under the past. So there'd be no accountability. Some versions of peace quite explicit about that, and presumably you would argue, we'd all argue, that that is no basis for a lasting peace to this terrible war. The second issue you raised, and again others will want to amplify this, you said that there are forms of accountability now being established that we've never seen before. I think that's really, really interesting. So there's some precedent-setting work and activity in progress that's being made in the course of the present investigations into the present war crimes. Do you want to say a bit more about that, perhaps, before we move on to Zero?
Yeah, I'm happy to, and I think also my colleagues from Ukraine can probably shed much more light on that. But there has been increasing pressure in the international community to want to close what was called the impunity gap, the time between when the crimes were taking place and when you were finally seeing justice for them. And if you look at crimes like those that occurred in Cambodia, it was 40 years later. The closest we started to come was the ICTY and the ICTR, so for Yugoslavia and Rwanda. But even those, it took years after the end of the conflict, and as we said, 24 years after to complete that process. Then the hope was that the International Criminal Court could bring even more real time, because you have it existing and you don't have to establish it, and you can start investigations. But there's still a lot of complications with that. You still have to have access to the crime scene. It's usually too insecure to be able to do that quickly. So what we're seeing in Ukraine is investigation in real time, as the Deputy Ambassador said, as the conflict's happening. So the battlefield is also the crime scene, and they're being intertwined, and my colleagues will be able to discuss the details of that much more. But the fact that the Office of the Prosecutor is trying war crimes at the same time that the conflict is happening, I think really is a novel situation.
Wheels of justice are grinding faster than they used to. In other words, it's very important. Thank you. I'd like to bring in Zira Kozliova, who's the legal director of Truth Hounds. I'd like to tell us more about the work of Truth Hounds and your reflections and sort of insights into the issues we're discussing.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks for organizers for organizing this event and for inviting us. And good afternoon for all of you, dear colleagues. It's very important to us your attention to the Ukrainian issue in general and war crimes and international violations also. For me, it's a very big honor and pleasure to be here and have this opportunity to talk to you about what's really happening in Ukraine, and very important things were mentioned before, and I want to continue this. I wanted before to start it from 2014 incidents in Ukraine, but for now I even think it can be good to say you about my personal experience. I think because I was born in Uzbekistan, it is not Ukraine, and it's about that I was born in deportation, to be honest, frankly speaking, because I'm Crimean Tatar. So now I'm also in deportation because I can go home from since 2014. Yes, I mean that it's very important to understand this systematic character of what Russia do during even centuries, not even decades of years. But if we talk about Ukrainian-Russian war since 2014, also it is very important to kindly remind you that it's started in Crimea. This is a place where war started and where crime started. And just example, last week also we can celebrate 51st birthday of the first victim of torture and murder in Crimea. And as for me, very important to highlight that impunity for these crimes in 2014 led further crimes after half of year in the east of Ukraine. And after that, we can see that for Russia it was very big signal that they can continue that after 2022, continue aggression and continue war crimes. And what also confirmed this thought, that Russia used the same patterns of behavior in occupied territories that were occupied after 2022. The typical type of torture, inhuman treatment, sexual violence, and it's not about some separate incidents, it's about systematic behavior regarding to all civilians, to all prisoners of war who stay on occupied territory or in Russia. And I think it's very important to understand my first point, that impunity for crimes committed between 2014 and 2022 has led to the new phases of the war and even more brutal crimes. What I mean, that if before 2022 we talk about crimes against some person who tried to keep their Ukrainian identity, but after 2022 it's about all people who stayed on occupied territories. It wasn't depend on even some political issues or certain position of these people. All civilians who stay on occupied territory were under these violations. They were tortured without any reasons, just because of these Ukrainian civilians who stay on occupied territory and stay under control and under power of occupation administration or soldiers who stay there, I mean Russian forces. And why I know that? Because since 2014 I involved in investigation of these crimes, and for 3 years I work at Truth Hounds like the legal director, but before I have been worked at Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine like a prosecutor. I investigated war crimes during 10 years there, so I can see this is systematic and sustainable increasing dynamic of these crimes. And if we talk about after 2022, we can see that it's this type of violations, I mean that share on all territory of Ukraine and includes all type of crimes that include in Rome Statute. Not only war crimes or crimes against humanity, but also we can talk about terrorizing, or even we discussed before about maybe potential genocide. But we have this discussion not only today, we discussed about that in 2023 when the first attacks on energy infrastructure of Ukraine happened. And so it also was winter, it also was cold time for Ukrainians, and we talk not about warm, we talk about that we lose electricity, but also water, also all services that we need to stay survive like Ukrainians in Kyiv and all other cities of Ukraine. And it's about also cities far from front line on the west side of Ukraine. It's not just about, because Russia very often talk about Donetsk region, Lugansk region, Crimea, I don't know, some south regions of Ukraine, but in general they attack all territory of Ukraine, including Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, these cities, where it's close to our border with Poland. And it's very close to, I mean, that other countries also, and we have even some incidents and some attacks, share on other territories. And so that's why I talk about that it's not all just about the continuous of this type of crimes, it's about increasing gravity of this violation, some new types of violation, and what's also important that now we can talk about some new goal, maybe terrorizing civilians and pressure to the people, maybe to have some, I don't know, agreed from our side to be agree on all conditions that they want or request that Russia talk about on some negotiation processes, but they don't have their results, and so because of that, what we see, that they try to use new types of weapon and new some, I don't know, drones and rockets. That's very dangerous. And for example, when we talk about last week, we can read in our channels that informed us about threats of attacks, about some new rocket. It's named Citron, and it's not a rocket that can target some civilians. It's anti-ship rocket, type of rocket, and it's very dangerous, and it can't be used in civilians places, any civilians places. So they can't not understand the consequences of these attacks. Yes, and we understand that it's all of this action to be as afraid, yes, and to pressure us. And so just one of example, when you stay on 21st floor with children without without lights, without electricity, and so you can't go to the shelter because of you should use some elevators or lifts, but you can't do that. And so what about you can think, yes? And I think they are waiting that we think about to stop war. But for us, stop war, it's just a victory and win in this war, because we absolutely understand that any negotiation, any dialogues, any explaining some international law provision, unfortunately, all of that don't work in this way, because we tried to do that, I don't know, in 2014 and 2019 and after 2024, but it doesn't work. So what about, I also want to say that how our colleague mentioned before, that it's really very, very new experience for international law, that how Ukrainians were documented. It's very many actors who include in this process, and it's very big challenge and new challenge to coordinate this work and to manage that in good way and best way. So we can see some good results and dynamic, because of for now it's accountability system include this three level and international level, national system, and investigation in third countries based on universal jurisdiction. And why it's very important, when we talk about Ukrainian investigation, before 2014 we even don't have any experience how investigate these crimes and what do with that, sorry. And also our legislation doesn't include all necessary provision about international crimes and so on, but we do very, very much for ensure this accountability, but sorry for it's very important things for me, so I can be a little bit nervous and try to share with you the main sense, you know, that Ukraine, even we are in war now, but we are really provided this investigation. For us it was very new, and so many things we do first time. But for now it's big challenge because of numbers of these crimes. Today we talk about more than 160,000, but today I checked the official information on websites of Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine, and it's at least 213,000 alleged war crimes. So I can't imagine this number, I can't imagine how to manage all this investigation, and I think good way to talk about macro cases, about big investigation and effective coordination between ICC, international investigation, universal jurisdiction, and national level, of course. But for national system, it's very difficult and unbelievable how to manage that. So international mechanisms also try to do their best to ensure this investigation. But at the same time, we are all living these turbulent conditions of war, geopolitics processes. And in this situation, I think it's very important to talk about universal jurisdiction cases, because separate investigation in third countries can be very effective and demonstrate to many people who stay in Russia that they can be brought to justice in future, even after 10 years. Or they can feel that when they want to go abroad of Russia, and it's very important to know, give them opportunity to feel safety in first countries and be free when they committed these crimes. And so in the end, I want to say that I hope that it's possible to limit this number of crimes when we demonstrate them, that these processes are providing continuous, and it can be maybe even finished in some years, but it can be possible. And so I think it's very effective, and investigation in third country can be more independent from any process that happened in the world. And so also they can use their expertise, their experience in investigation this crime abroad their countries in the world, and make it faster, more effective, more independent, use their opportunities, for example, use Europol opportunities or something else to find these people and to find their activities and assets, for example, and more additional very useful thing to make a full this accountability system of international crimes. So I think it's possible, but for me it's very important to highlight that it's possible in the world willing to stand for justice, and when we demonstrate that we are all of us on the same page on the understanding of importance of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zira. And I believe you've come all the way from Kiev specifically to take part in this event. Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, immensely grateful to you. Thank you. Thank you for also sharing your sort of personal background, your Crimean Tatar. And it's very important to remember the things that have been done to them. Since 2014, the repressions of Crimean Tatar civil society, which is sometimes relatively neglected, but it's an important part of the record of the abuses carried out by the occupation forces. So thank you for that. Well, maybe we'll come back to that later in Q&A. There may be some specific interest in that. So I'd like to bring in Oksana Pokulchuk now, who's the executive director of Truth Hounds. So please, we look forward to hearing your insights as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you, and thank you very much for you coming here. And for us, it's very important to share. I represent here Truth Hounds as well as Zera, and we are an organization that were founded in 2014 just to document what was going on at the time in Crimea and in Donbass, like as documenters. But since 2022, the challenge was accepted from our side, so we decided to do more, of course, because like just documentation work was not enough. So we include investigation. So we support different investigative bodies in Ukraine, on an international level. As Zira said already, on the basis of universal jurisdiction, we work with investigative bodies in other countries. So, and we call ourselves the organization of the whole circle, you know, so we do everything from the moment when something happens and we come to the place of the crime scene, we can, measure the whole or talk to people that witnessed this, to the moment when we represent the survivor or the families of victims in the court. So we do everything. That's why we know, different angles of the war that is now going on in our country. But there are many things I would like to share, of course, of course. But here, I think I will try to use the opportunity just to raise one thing, which maybe would be some interest. It's a question of a new weapon. So we all know that during the conflict, the weapon always, the question of weapon pop up quite quickly. During the ongoing conflict, soldiers on the battlefield just try to use the means that they have to make it more useful, more effective. The thing is that we are living in a capitalistic world, and of course it quickly picked up by businesses that want to use these technologies and to sell the weapon, which is understandable, of course, in the reality we are living in. But the question is we are now facing is, like, we all know about the drones and challenges the drones faces, but I'm a lawyer by myself, and I know that at least 15 years in academia we are talking about AI and artificial intelligence and weapon. And what are we as a civil society, at all, are going to do with this challenge? And what is the result? Nothing. There are millions of tons of articles about this, but we still don't have a clear position on, so what do we think about this? While we are thinking about this, Russia already used it. That's the thing. As simple as that. Now they use the technologies that can recognize, basic thing of AI and weapon is that the AI has to recognize who is civilian and who is the military. It's not that easy, of course, for many reasons. But the thing is that they use it now without this, basic, humanitarian, human, methodology. They use AI just in the way that when the drone goes and suddenly it loads the signal with the pilot, that fly it. Drone become to change its direction, and you don't know, you cannot presume which direction it will use. So it uses random direction. That's the way how they use it now. I mean the AI. But who knows what will happen in half of a year, which new technologies and which new methods will be used. And while we here talking and thinking about, what is our position on this, they already use it. The same is the issue with the weapon itself, like different drones, different, explosive elements that might exist inside. And not only drones, many things. So we now, in a quite, I'm very grateful to talk to here today about this issue, because we are in close communication with the Commission, EU Commission, in Brussels, where they just, now just start to think about the frames, about some rules on which European and I hope the British market will use to develop the new weapon. The thing is that there's a huge debate, because on the one hand we have like basic human rights standards, but on the other hand we have countries that will never follow it. And it's quite challenging. It's quite a challenging moment, because I, as a human rights defender, as a person from Ukraine, of course I want to protect as much civilians as possible. But on the other hand, I do understand that we have to be very smart developing these rules, because other countries, and I will name them, China, Iran, Russia, North Korea, many others, they will never use, these human rights standards. They will use and develop weapons that will kill as effective as possible. So we are in a moment when, on the one hand, we have to develop quite in a smart way these rules, how to develop, and we have to do it now, because now the situation around Europe is quite hectic. Each business, each country use different methods on and different policy, I would say, on how to develop the weapon and which weapon might be, okay and which is not, for example, selling. So first we have to quickly now develop the standards just to be united in this. And second, we have very quickly to put our efforts into the technologies that would protect civilians in all countries from this new weapon. Why I'm saying that? I think it was 2 months ago when the first time drones was used in, I think it was in Brazil during the protest, right? We have already saw how drones were used, by drug cartels and some criminals. So today's criminals, and tomorrow it will be like, I don't know, political or during the protest or whatever, so drones and other weapons will be used. And we have to act today, now, to protect civilians first, even in countries far from the conflict. And second, we have to think about, we don't have to think about what our position, we have to act on our position on AI, weapon, and challenges that we are facing now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, this war, as wars in the past, has been a terrible catalyst of innovation in military technology and practice. And this is not the first war in which drones have been used, but they've not been used on anything like this scale before. AI is much newer now, and it is a hypothetical problem that is now becoming a very real and practical one. What are the implications of AI for the laws that govern war? I mean, this is really, I get a sense from your remarks that the way this war is being fought is pushing up against the frontiers of the international law that we have, and demands a response. Yes, it demands ways of thinking and applying international law that have never had to be developed before. So it's a catalyst of legal change, as it were, potentially, as well as a catalyst of the actual conduct of war. You sounds like you want to jump in there before I...
Just very quickly, in accordance with international humanitarian law, we all know the rules that exist. Yeah, so the problem is that what are we going to do if some countries would never follow these rules? We don't have any mechanism now to, put pressure on them, and there's something that put us in a position where we are in a weaker position, just to defend ourselves compared to those who will not follow the rules.
Thank you. Our last panelist is Svetlana Van Bentham, who's a lead expert at the Reckoning Project, so Wendy's organization. So I think you have some specific issues you want to explore as well.
Thank you, Nigel. Is it working? Is it working now? Good evening. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for taking the time to come, and it is a privilege to be part of this panel. Now, as a legal advisor at the Reckoning Project, my day-to-day work is to read through the testimonies that have been documented by our researchers on the ground in Ukraine, and to try to package these testimonies, these individual stories, these patterns of conduct into legal submissions that we then file to domestic bodies and to international bodies, both those who are looking at individual responsibility and those who are looking at state responsibility. And in the minutes that I have, I'll take the time to do 3 observations that come from my work with the Reckoning. And the first one is that it really matters to survivors that they're not only able to speak about the stories of their suffering, but to also characterize that suffering as a legal wrong. So accountability is not just an abstract concept that we throw around at conferences or at intergovernmental events. Accountability for international wrongs is something which is very tangible, very personal, and very meaningful to survivors. So I was electrocuted will become I was tortured. I was forced to flee my home becomes I was deported or I was the subject of forcible transfer. And there is a value in that transition between the factual description and the legal characterization. I spent a month in Ukraine in November of last year, and I had the opportunity to meet some of the witnesses who provided their testimonies to the Reckoning Project, and they were very clear that legal accountability matters to them. But sometimes it's not very easy to give a legal name to a practice that seems wrongful. And the example that I would like to use is indoctrination. This is a phenomenon that has been exceptionally prevalent in occupied territories. We see that children are subjected to relentless re-education, Ukrainian symbols are being replaced with Russian ones, Ukrainian language is taken out of schools, they're subjected to military parades, military training, and overall there is an attempt to erase Ukrainian identity. And what we see in the descriptions from the witnesses is that many of these children are feeling lost, they're feeling isolated, some are having suicidal thoughts, some are feeling shaken about what identity they have. And one mother of a child that was taken to a camp in Crimea even said that this process broke her child. Now, indoctrination is not a term of art in international law. It is not a self-standing violation of international law that entails state responsibility, and it is also not an international crime as such, which does not mean that it is not wrongful. So what we do at the Reckoning, and we have been working on this topic for a few years, is to map out all the different rules that bear on practices of indoctrination. And of course, indoctrination can be used to enable or to facilitate international crimes such as deportation or conscription. Indoctrination can also be seen as a serious violation of international human rights law. When we think of the absolute prohibition of interferences with thought, or when we think about the right of children to identity under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, or even when we think of not individual rights but collective rights, the right to self-determination of the Ukrainian people as such. So what we do is to take a more comprehensive approach to international accountability and to map out all the different rules that bear on these practices. So in some ways we're trying to find the legal name, but sometimes it's not one legal name, but we have to find all the legal names that characterize this practice. The second observation relates to the point that was made by Oksana, and it is that certain practices that we see in Russia's aggression against Ukraine show gaps in our understanding of the boundaries of international law. And this is very clear when it comes to emerging technologies. For example, if we think about cyber-enabled international crimes, we do not have a specific conventional cyber-enabled international crimes, right? But, of course, existing rules do apply. The Rome Statute does apply to cyber-enabled conduct. The question is, do we have sufficient evidence to be able to create a good case for the interpretation of those rules in a specific way? And we have a paucity of jurisprudence on many of these questions. We don't have sufficient state practice and interpretations. So the process has been guided by different actors. For example, the International Criminal Court, the Office of the Prosecutor in December published their policy on cyber-enabled international crimes. And just this Monday, Chatham House issued a report that is complementing the OTP policy by looking at domestic and international accountability for such crimes. But it is very important to clarify the law in these ways, because without clarity we can't really have any deterrence. And then the second point is that this goes even beyond emerging technologies. This is also a question of how the law applies in general to contexts that we've been seeing for many, many decades. And something that we worked on at the Reckoning Project is displacement within occupied Ukraine. And we very often see practices of displacement which are not physically taking people from point A to point B, but it is the creation of an environment of coercion whereby through intimidation, through torture, arbitrary deprivation of liberty, you are coercing people to leave their homes. And sometimes people will leave after occupation has been established, but sometimes people will leave before the occupation is established. Why? Because if you wait, you are going to be the one facing torture or unlawful deprivation of liberty. So the question is, how do the Geneva Conventions and customary international law apply to those persons who leave before occupation is established? And we try to map out different interpretations under humanitarian law and human rights law to say that even in those cases, there is still accountability for driving these people away. And having this clarification of international law that comes from practices we see in Ukraine is very much strengthening the entire system of international law. Because of course now we're seeing this in Ukraine, but impunity travels, as was mentioned by the Deputy Ambassador. So clarifying the law now can really help in applying the law to different contexts. And my final observation is very brief, and it's more about a call for action, that there is a lot more to be done. There is a lot more to be done in relation to clarification of the law, and there is a lot more to be done to promote accountability avenues. One example is many states are adopting sanctions, and linking that with my indoctrination point, many of them are adopting sanctions for brainwashing of children. Well, if we were to tie some of these sanctions to specific rules of international law that have been breached, that would provide some idea of the interpretation of states of international law in its nexus to sanctions policies. Second, my frustration with the emerging technologies processes is similar to yours, Oksana. States can continue to clarify in earnest international laws that applies to the use of artificial intelligence and cyberspace. Third, civil society is very important because, in a way, even if states do not themselves clarify the law on their own volition, it is civil societies that is often prompting them to do so by bringing these cases to domestic courts or by bringing submissions to the United Nations bodies. And finally, there was a point that was made by Nigel about the very tight link between security and accountability, and that accountability is intrinsic to security. I would just say accountability under the law is a first step, but of course accountability is a fight that has to be continued. Why? Because sometimes even when we have accountability processes, for example in Yugoslavia, disinformation is still prevalent. So it has to be an ongoing fight to continue to educate persons and to keep the legacy alive of these different initiatives and these different truth-telling fora that we have established over time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. They're very thought-provoking reflections And your point about indoctrination is a really interesting one. It's not a unique feature of this war, but it's a distinctive one, I think, in the intensity and comprehensiveness of the attempts of these occupation regimes to erase and reset the consciousness, the identity of people, especially the children, who live there and who suffer in this occupation. It's really very, very, very interesting, very important. So we've got about half an hour now for questions, comments, reflections. Before we do that, I'll just say I will come back right at the end to our panelists just to ask if there's any final observations or reflections you'd like to conclude with before we all head off to drinks and the rest of the evening. And I will also ask specifically if there's anything that you want to advocate that we or our governments or others should be doing. So from analysis and interrogation and clarification to what next? How can others help and support this work? So, but now for questions. So we've got one there. Maybe we'll take two or three at a time, and then we'll come back to the panelists. So first, the lady here.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Victoria Dovichenko. I'm from Center for Geopolitics, Cambridge University. Thank you so much for a very timely, very painful, but we think a very necessary topic, and of course kudos to all of the organizers as well as the speakers. I would love to have a lot of questions, but two speakers absolutely brought to my mind, specifically if we are talking about legal innovations and the concept of the AI. And something that I'm exploring, so that's why please do be innovative in your responses, legally speaking. The usage of the AI in the drone technology, something that Oksana, you mentioned, but also both of you mentioned. In a sense, I'm kind of having dual approach in this case, because our Minister of Defense, I mean Ukrainian Minister of Defense, is using the AI in the embedded Delta system. So basically all-encompassing approach to actually controlling what's happening on the, not only kill zone, but specifically there, but also in the monitoring what's happening. On another side, I do echo with you, Oksana, which requires to some of the commitments on understanding in the international humanitarian law, in particular, how you protecting the civilians. So we are absolutely in between two very big steps. What do you think might be these transition steps till we do not have legislation enact, but we need a necessary step as of now, firstly, to help our militaries, but also our civilians? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. There's a gentleman at the back, then we'll come back to our panelists.
Yeah, thanks. I have a quick comment.
Sorry, not a gentleman. I can only see your haircut, and I apologize.
I just like to confuse people. A quick comment and a question on different issues. First, on AI, extremely interesting issue. Everyone is talking about that everywhere. At some point, I was surprised to find out that there are international programs that support the development of AI in certain countries like Belarus, so authoritarian countries. And that's civilian use AI, so it's different programs for people, for population. And I was also surprised to find out that it's done without any mention of human rights and the implications it will have for human rights. So some organizations, businesses that do it, they don't realize that authoritarian states will, by design, use AI against people, for prosecution, for surveillance, for control, and for obviously use in ammunition and weaponry. So I believe that the discussion on how we deal with AI used by the authoritarian state should go in a complex way, because using weaponry is one of the most dangerous use of AI, but not the only one. They will just use it in bad ways in general. So I think there is enormous field for international organizations to deal with this and to think how to approach it. So that's just a general comment. And the question about universal jurisdiction, there are lots of countries that apply it, which is great, but there also could be more of them. So what would be your thoughts how we can engage more countries into applying universal jurisdiction and doing it more effectively and more actively? Thank you.
Thank you. So a lot of interest in AI and also that point at universal jurisdiction. Who would like to tackle those issues first? Yes, sir?
I can talk a couple of words about universal jurisdiction maybe for now. What approach we use in our work before our case file that we transfer to other country, we try to check legislation of this country, their request for the universal jurisdiction, try to some reason to explain why we choose even this country, yes, and so in some cases, for example, we can see that in other countries it's more victim-oriented approach. Yes, some victims stay in other countries for now, or for example, perpetrators can move to third countries, and so in general we analyze that. First one. The second one, we look for expertise and experience of other countries and when they have some special units of investigation of these crimes. And so, if be honest, as a lawyer, I can say that if these investigators see real perspective of this case, they start to work on that. And so we try to do what we can to help them with this investigation. I mean, for example, we can use our own OSINT opportunities, collect some part of evidence, to communicate with victims and witnesses, to coordinate them, to communicate with even national prosecutor's office, and to explain them that we don't have enough resources in Ukraine, or for example, we don't have the same case, the same investigation. It's very important. For example, in some countries they can't investigate case if ICC or Ukraine investigate the same things. So I think it's very important for all actors who work on UJ cases to coordinate their efforts, to check all conditions of this case, what's happened, what investigation we have, why, for example, we ask other countries. Sometimes it's issue of crimes against humanity, and so as you know, in Ukrainian criminal court, we didn't have the provision about crimes against humanity still for 2024. So we can explain that it's not about just the war crimes, and our partners agree to open this investigation to ensure general accountability. Or, for example, we explain that ICC worked just on the cases about big fish. It's not maybe about some big fish, but it's commanders, a part of the chain of commanders and big system of responsible people who can be possible commission of these crimes, yes. But in general, it's direct work in any different countries. It's communications, our partners, other NGOs in this country, with investigators and prosecutors, and explaining them that this is cases important for all, not for Ukrainians. I mean that Russians see this impunity, they repeat these patterns in other countries, how our colleagues said before. For example, attacks on medical infrastructure had been in Syria, the typical attacks. And impunity in Syria can be possible to repeat the same patterns, and it's commanders who are responsible for specific military operation, the same in Syria and in Ukraine, the same people. So they stay safe in Russia for now, and it's not okay because we don't know about their plans for tomorrow, yes, and for future. And when we talk about that, we have this support. So I'm not sure that I answer in general, but it's everyday routine work, you know, that it's mainly in communication and research and the legislation and gaps of legislation, and to demonstrate them that it's important part of this big architecture system of accountability. And maybe just one thing about artificial intelligence. I think it's very important to keep in mind that in general we are not against this, because the big idea of artificial intelligence and using drones, for example, to protect civilians and to less this is people who died because of war, yes, and about how people to stay alive in the world. So it's just very important issue about what the goal and aim of people who use these drones, because they, for now, they're not protecting civilians. They use for this is human safari in many regions of Ukraine who are near for the front line, yes, and it's just very important to think about proving intention of these people who use that. And it's very dangerous when they want to use artificial intelligence that expand that's not that like some mistake, technological mistake. And that's why it's very important to regulate how to use this artificial intelligence in correct way. Thank you.
According to what Zira has already said, I'm a lawyer by myself, but I will speak now as a Ukrainian. What we need political bravery to open more cases in other countries, to be just ready to say to Russia that yes, we really don't like what you do. Because it's like the sanctioning. A lot of countries talk about sanctioning, but when it comes to sanctioning big businesses like Rosatom or other big businesses, we see the wall. No one hears us. It's like, yeah, great that you prepared the whole case. It's amazing, but not this time. Maybe later. Maybe next time. You face one by one, country by country, this wall. They don't want to be brave enough just to say what they really think about this war. So answering the question about the UJ, universal jurisdiction, is political bravery first. About the AI, I believe that we have now to put all our efforts, first of course, into the development, that's for sure, because we cannot avoid it. I don't like it. I'm afraid by myself, AI. Really, I'm not that old, okay, but I'm afraid, really. I'm not that, Jay-Z people who are like, oh yeah, that's great things that will help me to do my homework, whatever. No, I'm really afraid of it, really, very much. But as a Ukrainian, I do understand that we don't have any moment, to wait. But I believe that our efforts have to be put into the security from the potential danger. So it's in parallel, like two processes in parallel. First, the development, something that will, reflect to human rights and the standard that, European Union, that the UK support and protect. But on the other hand, technologies that would protect us. And something that I don't see that much, intention, at least from the business or from the government point of view. Thank you.
Go on, Satina.
Yeah, thank you. On the question and on the comment, on the question in relation to artificial intelligence, I completely agree. It's inevitable. A few states wanted to have it, and other states just have to have it. So we're in a position in which there's no going back from artificial intelligence in our conflict. But just to add some of the intergovernmental processes that are out there, as you might know, the UN Secretary General has called for the development of a new treaty that is going to be regulating the use of artificial intelligence. And the European Union and other states have been promoting a two-tiered approach to this, that some weapons that rely on AI in certain critical functions should be prohibited if they are unpredictable to their deployers, and that all other systems that have such AI functionalities are going to be regulated. And here we have many of these words such as meaningful human control, traceability, explainability that feature in the debates. So it will be really a question of seeing how to get that regulation from international to trickle down to the research and development of these systems and to the training of those who are actually going to be deploying them. And as a piece of best practice here in this country, there is a position of the Ministry of Defense that has been aired for many years at the group of governmental experts on autonomous weapon systems in Geneva. They co-authored draft articles on the use of autonomous weapons. And there was a committee in the House of Lords that discussed AI in weapon systems, and they pushed back on some of the positions of the Ministry of Defense. They also took testimony from a number of stakeholders, from civil society, from academia, and ultimately there was a conversation that happened at the domestic level about the best way to proceed with regulation. And I think that this is a very good model for all states to think about how this should happen at the national level. Now, there was a very interesting comment that was about the role of third parties, businesses, and other states that are facilitating the introduction of AI by states that are going to use it for harmful purposes. When it comes to other states, we need to pay a lot more attention to complicity rules of states in relation to the wrongdoing of others, as well as positive obligations of such third states to prevent and mitigate the use of such systems in this way. When it comes to business, it's much more difficult because we do not have direct obligations that are binding corporate actors, but we can think about individual criminal responsibilities of the CEOs and senior management of such corporations. And we can also think of the positive obligations of states to regulate such businesses, such that they're themselves liable under domestic law if they do engage in such acts of assistance. So there's a lot to unpack here, and hopefully in the future years there will be a lot more on complicity in relation to corporations.
Thanks very much. More questions? Just one here and one behind you. Both definitely gentlemen.
Sorry, Richard Reinhouse, former EU head of delegation in Moscow between 2000 and 2004. And during that time I went to Chechnya, and you mentioned this, and I think it's a very important point you make about, you know, the consistency of Russian behavior in conflict situations. I saw this myself. It's also, I would add to what you said, the flagrant corruption that is just prevalent, you know, throughout the armed forces. Look, international law and the rules-based order is not in a great place, as we all know. We have inconsistent application, including by the European Union, in terms of this. Certainly you're getting a lot of support, rightly, from the European Union, but we're not. If you take the other major conflict in Gaza and Palestine, it's a totally different story. So I'd like to ask you, in the light of what's emerging in terms of the settlement, I mean, are you worried about, which has been, you know, run by two real estate, New York real estate brokers, are you worried that this whole issue is just going to be pushed away, forgotten about in the effort to try and find some form of settlement? Are you worried about how much international support you really get? I mean, I don't think you're going to get very much from the United States, from what I see. In the context of Israel-Palestine, for example, the prosecutor himself has been sanctioned. So, I mean, just to give an example, so I mean, are you not worried that you're doing admirable work and domestically, but how much international support are you really going to be able to draw upon as once this conflict hopefully ends as soon as possible?
Thank you, and the gentleman behind.
Thank you. Simon Bibby from Crucial Analytics. I have to say, AI isn't new. We've been using it since 2010, but I'm not going to talk about that now. I've got three very brief questions, two general and one specifically for Nigel. First question is about accountability, particularly when you were talking at the beginning about the three levels, the card at the top, the middle management, if you like, and the foot soldiers. And when we look at Nuremberg trials, 1947, after the Second World War, they got hold of the ones they could at the top, these are the Nazis, but a lot of the middle and lower people remained in German society convinced Nazis and were never taken to court. So my question on accountability is, I hugely appreciate the amount of work you're doing in documenting what's going on. How on earth are you going to get these Russian soldiers or generals or even Putin at the end of the conflict and hold them accountable? So that's the first question. Second question, all this is predisposed on international rule of law, and modern Ukraine was established after the fall of the Soviet Union, and you had America and Russia and other European countries all signing the treaty that guaranteed the sovereignty and boundaries of Ukraine. So unless the final agreement restores the original boundaries of Ukraine as set up in 1991, I think, including Crimea, how are you going to apply international rule of law to accountability? Third final question is for Nigel. You've written this book, Global Political Risk in the Age of Transformation, and thinking of Mark Carney's comments at Davos last week, are you thinking of writing a sequel?
That's a nice question. Very friendly, thank you. But to the other, more important questions. There's an awful lot there from both of the questions, a lot to discuss, including on the question of, yes, an awful lot of important documenting and investigating is taking place. Actually, it might be interesting to hear a bit more about how that is done, and how that works, what it's like. But then what will follow from that? What are the prospects? What are the challenges in ensuring that delivers something that we want?
So I think the two questions are related in a lot of ways. How do we achieve accountability? Well, we don't if it's ignored and pushed to the side. I certainly worry about that. As you've said, the current world order is not pushing in favor. And I think I have spoken with a lot of colleagues who've been working on international justice issues for a long time, and we wonder if we reached the peak and now we're on the backslide, or where we are in that pendulum swing. I do think the pendulum always swings back, and I do think that there will be some form of accountability at some point, as naive as that may sound. I think addressing all levels of accountability is a perpetual challenge, and we've learned a bit from each conflict on how we might do that. And so there's non-judicial and non-legal, there's more traditional approaches in communities that can help with absorbing some of the line-level soldiers in some contexts. I think we have to apply all the tools at our disposal to look at legal remedies, non-legal remedies, international judicial remedies, state-on-state remedies, reparations. Again, what's meaningful to the victims and survivors may not be solely legal accountability. So we need to look at what are the other tools in our toolkit to help bring that meaning to them. In terms of documentation, it does sound a lot like we're collecting this information, and that's great, but if there's no political will and if there's so many actors who've been involved as perpetrators, what do we do? And I kind of flip it, because we know there will be no justice and no accountability if we don't collect the information. So that's the starting point. So we get the information, and then you develop that critical mass, and you develop the pressure, and you have all of these groups who've been doing this, and that story is there, and they can't ignore that because we know it and we have it. And I think that's the pressure that you need to keep putting on the political actors in the major powers, political actors and other powers, and it may take time, as I said. This is a very long process, but I do believe that accountability is achievable in the end.
May I a bit echo to what you already said? Something came into my mind. So time ago, I was documenting war crimes in Kharkiv region. It's closer to the it's eastern part of Ukraine. And there's a city, Izum. In this city, it was under the occupation for a longer time, and there were a lot of precise attacks on buildings where civilians were hiding from missile attacks. A lot of them were killed there, and after one example just came into my mind. So for many families who still live in Izum now, there's a big issue and a big question on how it happened, how their relatives died, like who's responsible, what are the names of the you have to understand, there were like dozens of hundreds of missiles on one city, but in one building there were the moment when civilians were hiding from, as I said, from the attack, and at least we don't know exact number, but at least 52 were killed. The remains of the bodies was found of 34, I think. All others are still missing, so we don't know what happened to them. We know, but we don't know. And you know what our work, how it impact on the human lives, is that when you come on the place, when you do this small investigation, which means nothing for the big war, which means nothing for the international community, etc., because it's just like one building, one place somewhere in the middle of nowhere, closer to Russia border. But after this investigation we done, after the talks and documentary work that we did, they were able to develop a place where they now can come and remember their loved ones. They now have a story to tell what happened. They know the names. And for me, it's very important what I see on the very local level. They want to include this story and maybe other stories about those who were killed, based on documentary work that done by NGOs, into the local history, into the school curriculum on the local level. And for me, maybe we don't know if Putin will be in jail. We don't know if, I don't know, other people would be in jail and what will be at the end of this crazy war. But you know, these small things are equally important because they know what happened, they have the place, and on the local level, they put this into their local history. And for me, for the human rights defender, is something that is crucial. And it's something that gives me energy to continue working against big, you know, fishes, like against generals, against these, you know, big bosses that probably, I don't know, they might hide somewhere, right? That as it happened, as you mentioned, after the Second World War, right? But you know, there's something that fueled me very much, and I just want to read this, you know, story and say that I think for everyone who is sitting here has something like this, has this story behind, you know, our work. And it's equally important, and it gives us energy to continue working, whatever.
Just a couple of words about three level, yes, of
Sorry.
About three levels of perpetrators, and when we work in prosecutor's office, we try to focus on direct perpetrators because we have access to the place of incidents. But one of the big challenge, most of these cases in Ukraine, it's cases in absentia, you know, because these people stay in Russia, and we share with Russia these people because we want to have our people in Ukraine. But if be idealistic, yes, Russia should continue these cases and should bring to justice this. Of course, never happened, but what I mean that we have this, you know, database of this judgment, and so all these suspicions, and we know about that, and we documented that, so we have these files, and we don't know what happened in future. Maybe, I don't know, some power or government change in Russia, and they want to negotiate in the democratic way, yes, and talk about real democratic values of justice, and so on, so on. We don't know what happened in future, but we keep this information in our history of judgment system and justice system in Ukraine. And you know, even we will talk about that in 10 years, or some Russians want to know something about that, we can share our judgments that include evidence about crimes that committed these direct perpetrators. And what we do at Truth Hounds, for now we have IDOC system, and in this system we try to build cases that can include all level of this part of change of commanders, from direct perpetrators to the high level commanders or political person, for example. And every day we add this case with new information about new people who in this group who are responsible for this crime. And for now we have, you know, big picture about many people who are part of this big group, I mean, who represent Russia and commit these crimes. So we can't talk about maybe all of these people, but most of them identified even for now. And different actors work on that, and we try do not duplicate, you know, the work. If somebody work on some cases, we try to find new person and give additional information to build this picture. So that's what we do, for example.
I think it depends on your definition of accountability. I remember vividly the first few days of the war, these young tank crews, 20, 18-year-olds, arriving just outside Kyiv, where the bridge was, where they were stopped, basically. And there was a report, I can't remember the name of the village, but these tank crew got out and got hold of a retired couple who'd come out of their houses and said, "Where are the Nazis? Where are the Nazis?" Now, they've been totally brainwashed. Are they accountable? Are they culpable? And is accountability for retribution, or accountability, as you said, just for being able to make a story of what actually happened out of the mess of the war?
Maybe
Yeah, I'm happy to.
So Selina, yeah, and then we'll maybe have time for a couple of very quick questions.
Yes. I was going to go to the one of the first questions that you asked, but I'll address this one as well briefly. Just as with AI, the problem of not having perpetrators within our jurisdictions is not that new. And what we can do is exactly what Wendy says, which is to just be prepared. So we do the legal work, we do the factual work, and these people sometimes travel. They go on holidays, they go for treatment. How was Pinochet caught?
Putin might go to the border.
It's a international law.
Different story.
Things like happened when the drones attacked the train. Last night. In Russia, somewhere there is somebody controlling the drones. That is to find out who that person was that actually did that attack on a civilian train.
Sure, and this is an empirical question of how much we can trace, but this is something that at least people that I work with from the cyber sector suggest it's possible to trace.
Yes.
So it is possible to trace at least to the entity. So there's the empirical side, which is to identify the facts. There's the legal side of interpreting the law. And here comes your point, for example, of how do we define accountability and who is accountable? Can we think about defenses in relation to brainwashing? There is no such defense in relation to brainwashing, but it's a question of a prosecutorial strategy as to who is going to be taken for these trials. And then finally there is the question which is between substance and procedure. Okay, the law is good, but we can't really enforce the law. And here comes my final point, which was precisely that. We do the legal work, and then we try and wait for every opportunity that we have to catch these people, to try to press them and induce compliance through the mechanisms we have, whether it's sanctions in relation to a state or individual coercive measures. But this is the only thing that can be done. I think this ties to Richard's question. Do I worry? That's what I do. I worry most of the time. But I think that worry doesn't get us that far. And when it comes to this type of work, what I found is that we worry a lot when we see the macro level. But, for example, we submitted a complaint on the principle of universal jurisdiction in Argentina around 2 years ago, which was for torture committed in occupied Ukrainian territories. And now, of course, Argentina is far, it was very much detached from the conflict, but what we tried to establish is that there is some kind of understanding between the Argentinians and Ukrainians. Why? Because of the history of Argentina with the military dictatorship. So even if maybe it does not work at the macro level always, at least it's convincing some people, and I'm sure that we convince many people in Argentina by telling this story, by bringing a good complaint to the system, that there is something to be said about accountability pursued even there, even so far away.
Very quickly on all of this. So the Nuremberg precedent might lead one to the pessimistic conclusion that you have to occupy a country in order to bring accountability. That's clearly not the case. There have been many other examples, including former Yugoslavia, where justice has been served without that very onerous condition. I think it's also helpful to look at this from the, as it were, from the Russian point of view. The Russians are not complacent or relaxed about this work at all. It unsettles them, and you may know more about the details because you're immersed in this work. But from where I sit, the Russians would much rather this sort of work is not happening. And there's evidence that the ICC indictment of Putin has restricted his travel. And when it was unsealed, the noise and the commentary coming out of the Kremlin was not sort of dismissive and derisory. It was alarmed and unsettled. And it was one senior figure in the Kremlin said, if things carry on like this, then even the Kremlin cleaner will end up in The Hague. So they don't like this at all. And I think that's very, very significant. Just finally, you kind of mentioned my book. Yes, still in print, if anyone wants to buy it. Political risk is a work in progress, or a work in regress, perhaps. And there used to be that joke in the 1960s that French constitutions should be filed under periodical literature. And the same is true of books on political risk. By the way, I have one coming out in just a few months' time about sanctions in Russia. So you don't have to read it, but you have to buy it. So finally, just about enough time for a crisp question or two and a crisp answer or two, and then I will come back to the panel and ask you for your last important thing that you want our audience to take away, and in particular, what can we all do or encourage our governments to do in practice? So there's...
Yeah, Mark, I'm a barrister, so it's what one individual can do. There's a film out called Mr. Nobody Against Putin.
Yes.
Mr. Nobody against Putin,
Yeah.
a teacher in Russia who was so shocked at what they were doing, indoctrinating children, that he recorded what was going on. It's now a film, you can see it, it's going global. So what one man can do, that was one teacher, Mr. Nobody. I'm a Christian, I would say, I don't have the same organisation, but I'd love to pray that there'd be Russians who are appalled at what's happening in their name, in the name of Russia. Decent Russian people you've got, it's sucked into this evil, that one by one they will have the courage to reveal what's going on with evidence. Just like Mr. Nobody, that then you've got the evidence from, as I say, I'm a prosecutor, I rely upon witnesses. One witness is so powerful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is a remarkable documentary. Okay. What?
The question is there.
Oh, there is another one. Okay, we have time for a second. Excellent. Excellent.
Thanks a lot. I'm really grateful for this event. I'm Ukrainian. I'm staying with my children for 3 years in the UK as I fled the Zaporizhia region. And actually, the question if these people, if the panelists, are they worried if any people could be taken accountable for what they're doing in Ukraine, it really triggers me. Because it sounds very much like at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, like how Ukraine could stand against Russia. So this is the same, I would say, this is not a moral dilemma for Ukrainians. We have to do this. And I'm really grateful for everyone who's involved in this work. Everybody is doing it with what we have, where we stand. And I would really love to everyone remember that Ukrainian people stopped the army which was thought to be unstoppable. And probably making the impossible possible is the motto of the Ukrainians. Thank you, guys.
Okay, you are standing between us and the drinks. So, clear, crisp, incisive final remarks, please. Wendy.
So I think if I'm going to leave you something, I'd like to leave it the plea for continued support for this kind of work. As I said before, and as Oksana said, we cannot promise where it will lead and what will happen, but we can promise that it will lead nowhere. Nothing will happen if we don't have it. It's this work that helps influence the Russian population. It's this work that helps bring the global south. It's this work that brings the relentless attention. And so I would leave it there.
You accept donations?
We do.
Okay. Reckoning Project and Truth Hounds, get on the website so you know what to do. Okay, so.
Yeah, I think, sorry. I mean that it's a very good point that we do what we have to do, because when you work on that during a long time, you can feel some frustration or demotivation or something like that. But for now, we understand that we will do that. That it's not depends how long it will be, because it's not like a sprint. It's like a marathon. Yes, and we got it now, because very many our expectation we didn't see the results what we want. But for now, we absolutely understand that we have only one way to continue this for the victory and for the win, because it's just one option what we have for now. Thank you.
I would ask for international solidarity, something quite old and something which I hope will stay with us forever. We need international solidarity to Ukraine, to Gaza, to forgotten South Sudan and many other places. We really need it now, because the whole world is in quite a fragile moment now, and I think that the bravery of each person is important now. Bravery to say, yes, I'm still staying for international solidarity, I'm still staying for the international law.
This war was thrust upon Ukraine, and it is not for Ukraine to deal with this war on its own. For so many years, the global community has been talking about the fight against impunity, about our commitment to accountability. Well, now it's time to show that they actually meant it when they said it.
And that concludes the formal part of our deliberations this evening. Thank you all very much for coming. It only remains for us to thank warmly our excellent panel, Wendy, Sarah, Oksana, Svetlana, especially Sarah, who's come all the way. Wish you a safe journey back and a safe time in Kiev. Thank you.